All right, what's up, everybody? It's Christopher Harris, and I'm back with, I guess, for lack of a better phrase, we've been calling this Church Talk. That's the name that kind of originated when we did the first two videos. If you haven't seen them, you need to go to my YouTube page and check out the original video that we posted there, sort of an initial response to two shootings that took place. And since the time of that recording, when we recorded that, we had the situation that happened in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And since that recording, now we've had a situation where a brother was found lynched. We've had another murder. And on the backdrop of all of that, we've had, I don't know exactly what the latest total is. The last time I looked at it, it was about 4 or 5 police officers that have been shot and killed in Dallas, Texas. So, y'all, it's mayhem. It's confusion. And so I got some additional brothers on the line with me who will be able to lend from another perspective. Before, I had brothers who were pastors and ministry leaders and social justice activists and things of that nature, experts and millennials and all of that. These two brothers, one who we've got on the line on audio, maybe coming on video in a little bit, and another brother here on audio and video. I'm going to introduce the one that's on audio first, Brother Derek Fiacher, who is a man of faith, but is also currently the city manager in Polk County in Winter Haven, Florida. It has been involved with social justice, government issues, as far as back, I know for a fact, at least 1996. 1997.
That's right.
That's how long we've known each other, man. That's a long time, isn't it?
It's a long time, but I'm glad that we still connected.
Yeah, man. Yeah, man. And then Derek is, as I mentioned, he's a man of faith and very balanced in his perspective, and is going to lend his voice as he helps to oversee civil servants and city leaders and all of the things that come along with that kind of leadership. In addition to that, I've got on the line Brother Steve Smith. Steve and I have known each other since about 97. So we've known each other a long time as well. And both of these men are men of faith, pastors, preachers. Steve is also a practicing attorney in Jacksonville, Florida, has his finger on the pulse of a number of major things that are going on. We're praying for you, Steve. I know you shared with me a couple of things that are even happening for you today. And so, man, we pray that you know, all the things that you got your hands on, the people that are involved with that, even to the highest levels of government that you're involved with, man. We're just praying for you, praying for those folks, and just praying that God will just kind of intervene in that situation. So, Steve, we're glad to have you on, man.
My pleasure.
Yeah. So brothers, let's jump in, man. Where do we even start, man? You know, let me preface my question there by saying that, you know, I've been very honest over the last few days to even say that we've got to be at least acknowledge the range of emotions that we have. It doesn't mean that we've got to just spill those emotions on social media or spill them in an unhealthy way, but I do think we have to acknowledge those. I think number two, I have been trying to be very intentional about remembering that I am first a spiritual leader, and secondly, a person who's called to speak God's word into culture and into social issues. I'm not a social activist first. I'm a spiritual leader first, right? And the priorities that come with that. So when you guys kind of look at everything that's going on and everything that's happening, and you know the kind of work that you guys do every day, what's been some of the things that have been crossing your mind? Where do we start with this discussion? Derek, are you there?
One of the things I think that we've got to make sure as individuals that we examine the entire picture. But I do think it is time for a real conversation, not only within our communities, but in government. And if you've been following me, I have already started to say I've got to have a discussion not only with the elected officials, but I've got to have discussions with our law enforcement, but also the community leaders in Winter Haven, not only the ministerial coalition, but those individuals who have taken up the mantle for what I call the hip hop justice leaders in our community, that really can speak to those in the community who feel like there is no trust in law enforcement, no trust in government. And I think we've got to have a conversation, but we just can't have a conversation. We've got to strategically plan on how we deal with these systematic problems that continue to be perpetuated throughout the country. We haven't seen it directly in our community, but if it's happening in one area, it can eventually get to our area. And I think that beyond the conversation, we've got to get in place political leaders who are willing to speak truth to power. I think about when Dr. King said that violence never brings permanent peace. It solves no social problem. It creates new and more complicated ones. And so we've got to think about beyond the marching, beyond the screaming, what are we going to do now? I said we can't make this a moment. It has to be a movement. And we have so many people who specialize in moment opportunities, but don't continue to follow up with the movement of being engaged and being involved and making sure that the people we elect into office also appoint people who are going to make sure that equality is across the board, regardless of race, color, creed, sexuality. And so those are the things that I think are critical. We just can't keep having conversations. We can't just keep praying. We've got to strategically plan on how we deal with this problem that continues to go along. I said at a church recently that, I'm tired of praying if we're not going to do anything with it. You got to get up off your knees after the prayer and the faith and actually strategically make steps to change the dynamics of your community and those who rule over us.
Wow, man, that's good. It sounds like you're saying, Derek, a little bit that we've got to be a little proactive.
We have to. I mean, we've got in this community, in my community, in the African American community, which I live, work, and play, where I was born and raised, we've got more individuals who register to vote that but are not voting. And I don't understand how you can register to vote, but you can't go to the polls and actually vote. We have individuals who are trying to get their rights restored, who want to vote, and you have the opportunity to speak on their behalf, and you're not showing up. I have a problem with that, but you show up as what I call, and Chris, on my Facebook page, I call them social media activists. But if that's all you're doing, what else? Where are you going to take that social media activist? Because all you're doing is directing your information to one group, a segment of your friends. How is the information you're talking about on your Facebook page going to get to someone else's and get in front of City Hall, get in front of the governor, get in front of your legislator, get in front of the president? And I like social media activism, but beyond that, you've got to do something else. You got to put your feet to the pavement and your press some flesh. Yeah,
man, I'm with it. Talk to me, Steve. What you processing initially, man? What you thinking?
I believe that context is always important before you have any discussion. You have to have context, or you consider the context of what we're in. People would like to start right now from the latest event. And the latest event has been the Dallas massacre, where some individuals committed some cowardly acts, and literally sniped and murdered at least 5 police officers, injured, shot 12, and also a dark police officer. So our thoughts and prayers are certainly with those people, their families, and all those that are affected, even that police community. The next is falling back from there is the issue of the murders, I say murders, homicides of Antoine Shumpert and Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. Those murders of Black bodies, those killings at the hands of law enforcement. And certainly there's investigation that has to be completed. But the difference is these lynchings now, as lynchings are just as American as apple pie. but now they used to have public ceremonies, public gatherings to watch with families and children, watch African Americans be brutalized and strung up on trees and burned literally alive, castrated, and pictures taken and sent as postcards, and it went behind closed doors. But now, because of technology, is making it so now these lynchings, 21st century lynchings, are public.
Wow.
And so just understanding the context that you have of people who after having been enslaved and frankly, usually when you start having this conversation, people want to get over it, but you can't get over what hasn't been reconciled. Without reconciliation, there can be no lasting peace. And so there has to be reconciliation, particularly amongst the races, not a temporary Band-Aid. We have Band-Aids in this country that we've used. There are people who believe in the Constitution that is as perfect as God's word, but it had to be amended. And if it had to be amended, there would be no need for an amendment. The same thing as the old covenant and there being a new covenant.
Wow.
But being a need for a new covenant if the first was perfect. And so, and it's not that that the first biblically and spiritually terms that it was that the problem was the actual law. The problem was that it was weak through the flesh. That there are people.
Hey Derek.
Was that?
Yeah, I'm hearing you.
Okay,
Yeah.
can you hear Steve trying to sneak a sermon in here on us?
I said he was trying to get an offering.
Yeah.
Hey, you didn't hear me. I was moaning.
We'll pass the plate later.
Yeah. So Steve.
Yeah, but bringing it back. Essentially, what I'm saying is that there are people who want to say that the Constitution is perfect, but if the Constitution was perfect, there would be no need to amend it, and there would be no need to pass these amendments that outlaw slavery or that now accord people who were born. I mean, even the Dred Scott case, where it was said that there was no law that a white man was bound to abide by as it pertains to Africans or Africans, those of African descent, that we actually had no rights. And so to come through this way, to come through the civil rights movement, to come through Jim Crow, and to now come to the new Jim Crow, because the 13th Amendment, it outlaws slavery, but that slavery now has been outlawed. But there's a part of that amendment that a lot of people don't realize is set for a violation of law. And so that's the reason why in violation of law, you have situations where people are being incarcerated at mass rates. And when you have a great number of people who their whole family system failed, family structures, communities have been broken down, even in enjoying the freedoms that we do now, that we didn't have, to be able to drink from the same fountains, to be able to play together, to go to the same schools. The same inequities yet continue. Yeah. And those inequities are redlining, housing discrimination. I mean, I'm trying to bring it home here. Those inequities are what creates the situation, the boiling pot, that those who were slave catchers in the past were able to enforce black codes. Those who were able to enforce those laws that were ungodly. Now, people of color believe that they have now transformed and taken off their hoods of the KKK and now put on the blue suit with a badge. And now those same people are being over-policed, and they're being harassed for their cultural dispositions. It shouldn't be that your legal cultural disposition has you end up in a morgue when you are stopped for a tail light, or for selling CDs.
Wow.
And so when you have this context that's never given, that people want to put aside, you would never understand why people feel that they're being picked on, and that there's one group of people that have been marginalized and pushed to the edges of society, and there's others who enjoy certain freedoms. The freedom to be able to exercise their First Amendment right as it pertains to law enforcement, and ask them, why did you stop me? If you ask, why did you stop me? Now you violated a law called POP, pissing off the police, which is not codified, written into law, but it is something that individual police officers don't, at times don't like. And so we can get into the solutions, but context is important to understand that that's what we're dealing with, where certain segments of the population don't feel like they're being heard, that even with their elected officials, there's no changes that are made. Even at the highest level of government, I can elect them to the highest level of government, and then you have people who act out of anger and frustration and not constructively, and you have these massacres pile up left and right and build up more acrimony between races and different backgrounds and demographics.
Man, you just gave us 400 years worth of history in like 4 minutes. I think context is king.
Yeah.
And so with what you just said, let me make a statement and then ask a question.
Okay.
And I want Derek to jump in first here.
Okay.
Over the last few days, one of the things that I've been really processing is, and I try to be very sensitive to the fact that the media, as they share news, will oftentimes interject commentary that we've got to be able to distinguish between the news and facts and then the commentary, right?
Exactly. Yes.
And so as I'm listening to that and I'm processing, one of the things that I've kind of resolved is that it is, number one, it is human tendency to want to blame a person or a group of people for the problem or a problem, right? That's human tendency, right? We want to point the finger and say, somebody's got to be to blame for this. And as a part of that paradigm for me, I'm saying to myself now, wait a minute, we can't point the blame at one group because there's layers of issues here that's got to be resolved. And so from the angle of you guys, Derek, you're in government. What is the role that government can play in this, right? I think the church has a role. I think police have a role. I think the black on black community has a role. I think the education system has a role. The justice system has a role. I think, community leaders have a role. The church has a role. But in this context, for our discussion, what role do you think government can play in this, Derek?
Government has to be willing to take an introspective look at themselves and see what are they doing to make sure that the problem is not being elevated by them. And that's the key that government has to say to themselves, we've got to be proactive. And if you don't have proactive elected or appointed officials, you're not going to see a change. I have to constantly think about my role because I don't believe that the statement that people are trying to put us all in one block, or all police officers in one block, because I have relatives who are in law enforcement. I don't believe that, and so I have to be mindful of that. And then I represent as the chief administrative officer, police, fire, sanitary workers. But government has to be willing to say to itself, what are we doing? Are we willing to have conversations with the community? Is the only time that we interact with the citizens that we represent when there's a problem, or is it all the time? And that's one of the things that, for me as a leader, I have challenged our law enforcement in particular, based on the conversation in the country. And I've challenged our chief of police and other leaders in the police department to reach out to the community, find out those individuals who don't like the police department and have that conversation. But not only that, what am I doing, or what is government doing to make sure that there is diversity training within your organizations, that people actually know how to deal with individuals from different sets of the community? But not only that, about how to deal with that, but making sure that the police department and government looks like the people it serves. It's not a thing that you have a percentage of the population that has no representation that looks like them. And as a leader, my goal is to make sure we have that at the table. Government has to be willing to say, we have a problem in some areas and be able to deal with it. And that's what happens. That's the problem, that sometimes we don't want to say that we have an issue or concern. And if you're not willing to do that, we're going to always have problems. That's why I think it is very critical for people to be aware that when they say voting doesn't matter, well, let me advise you that the people you put in office, from the president, from the, well, how I like to say, from the White House to your house, the people you put in office appoint judges, they appoint governmental employees that make decisions on your behalf. And if those individuals that you put in office by not voting or voting appoint people that don't represent your interests, we're going to continue to have this problem. And if we don't have people in government that are willing to speak up against those within the fold for their wrongdoings, then we're going to always have problems. And so for me, as a governmental leader, I am pleased that the administrative team that we pulled together here in Winter Haven, we're trying to find a way to be proactive. And I can tell you, the police chief has already reached out to individuals in our community who have stated in the past that they've had problems or issues with some of our officers. But he's also saying, let's have a discussion in our community in the next 2 weeks, where we talk about the interactions that have taken place between our local law enforcement and our community. But this is not going to just be a discussion among police officers and just citizens who have problems, but how do we all get together? Those in the church community, those who are the social media activists, but also the hip hop leaders in our community, because there's a set of our population that needs to hear from people that look just like them, talk just like them, and have them at the table and let people realize that they are a valuable commodity to this discussion. And so if governmental leaders are not willing to look in the mirror and say, there's an issue and concern, and then step out front and say, I'm going to take the heat. Yes, I'm going to let you talk about some of the problems we have and not get on the defense, but really listen, because sometimes people just want to listen. And I think that's the key that I'm trying to do. But governmental leaders across the country have to be willing to do that. And I can tell you right now, looking at the climate of the political climate in this country, it's hard right now for people to talk to each other when they're representing different ideologies or different parties. They're not even willing to come and sit down at the table. And you represent not only a Republican party or a Democratic party or idea, but you represent all people. And the two presidential candidates, they're running to represent all people, regardless of their party. And that's the problem. The political climate in this country can help to create some of these problems. But as Bob Marley says, emancipate yourself from mental slavery. The problem is we don't have chains on our arms anymore. We've got chains on our minds. We're not thinking like we're free. And so, when I listen to Bob Marley and he says that's very powerful to me. And I tell people, there are no more chains on your hands. The chains are now on your mind, and you don't realize that you're free to transform the very fabric of our communities. And that's the key that I'm dealing with. I'm the people I'm talking to now, even with this suit and bow tie on, I'm not trying to let them know that, hey, I understand what you're dealing with. I live in your community. I live in your neighborhood. So that government has to be willing to step out front and say, there's an issue, there's a concern. Now we want to work to make the change. And if they're not willing to do that, we're going to find ourselves in the same situation.
Yeah. Wow. Derek, you're not on the video with us, but I knew you had a bow tie on somewhere. If you didn't have one, you see my son trying to stick his head in. I'm sorry.
He's trying to get some of this knowledge.
Yeah.
That bow tie don't go. The bow tie with me every day.
Absolutely. Derek, one of the things you said, though, is I think pretty enlightening, because you and I met in '96 at Bowie State. And I think one of the things that occurred there's a seed that's planted that informs us of government and informs us of, what is taking place on the multiple levels. And so I think, oftentimes, because there's a sense of when I say ignorance, I'm not talking about behavior as much as I'm talking about the knowledge of it. There's an unawareness about the processes and procedures of how government works and the branches of government and things of that nature. You got to take that from the civil government classroom and actually put that into practice. And I think for our community, there's been a huge gap in that context.
Correct. I keep telling individuals, the power is in your pen. You can scream and yell all day long, and they know the powers that be. Sometimes individuals, they will scream and yell, but they won't be consistent in coming to school board meetings, won't be consistent coming to government meetings at City Hall or contacting your legislators. We have more people standing in line to get Jordans, Nikes. Jordan's been retired for probably over 20 years, and people are standing in long lines and paying over $100 to get Jordans, and he hasn't picked up a basketball. But you got somebody that every 2 weeks in Winter Haven is making decisions on your behalf. You've got people in Tallahassee that are making decisions on your behalf for 2 to 3 months out of the year. You've got people in Congress that are making decisions. They are just getting ready to go on summer break, but you'll stand in line for new Jordans. You'll stand in line for a new iPhone. You'll stand in line for a new product. You'll stand in line to go to an Essence Festival concert. You'll stand in line to go to the Neighborhood Wars. You'll stand in line to go hear Fantasia and Anthony Hamilton at the Sundome. But you won't stand in line.
Calling too many names now. We don't want to offend too many people.
I love them all because I go to the Essence Festival. I go to the Neighborhood Wars with my frat brother Steve Harvey, Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. I just had to throw that out.
Watch yourself now. Watch yourself.
But the key is, but you can't stand in line for 30 minutes to bubble in a dot of somebody that's going to represent you for 2 years or for 4 years, but you'll stand in line to buy Jordans that's going to walk on the street.
Yeah.
But you're going to walk. And that's my problem. You'll be on Facebook 24 hours, 7 days a week, and all you're doing is talking about where you're going, but you're not providing insight to the people that might be your friend. I don't just want likes on my posts. I want action. I don't want a moment. I want a movement.
No, I'm with it, man. So listen, I want to be sensitive to the time because I know in just a few minutes, Derek, you're actually going into a meeting, governmental meeting there. And Steve, you're on your way to a press conference. So I'm glad you guys blocked out just a few minutes of time to kind of just, talk this out just for a little bit. Steve, in 1 minute, give me closing arguments, if you would.
One thing I abhor is intellectual dishonesty and discourse. That you have to be honest with yourself. There are issues with societal factors that impact our communities, and there are issues within the community that impact us. The 10 rules I gave for dealing with law enforcement are things that we can do to make sure we don't end up as a hashtag. And those are things that we need to teach our children and things of that nature. It's unfortunate and shouldn't be that way, but that's what it is. The next thing is this. It was talking about what government needs to do. Frederick Douglass said that power concedes nothing without demand. And it never did, and it never will. And so if you're looking for people who may or may not be empathetic to your plight, to make changes that in effect take away from them, if that be changing the laws to make sure people there's psychological reports on law enforcement, or that the laws are more lenient towards or more liberal towards having a conviction against a law enforcement officer for excessive force, or changing the grand jury process. That's biased because it's only one side of the story. Those are things that we have to do in a collective, whether it means politically. And the next thing I'll say is economically. There's economic power that our community has, but we're a consumer nation, we're consumer people. And because of that, we have to decide where we want to bank. How we take and move our money can cause the powers that be to move at our wishes, to make sure that fairness and equity is implemented, if not out of a sense of empathy and love for the common man, then out of the impact on their bottom line. So
Well, listen, y'all. I'm getting ready to give you. Y'all loaned me 30 minutes, and I'm getting ready to give you 1 minute back.
Okay.
Y'all are, again, thank y'all so much for your time. Y'all got busy schedules. You got families that you're leading, churches that you're leaders in, government that you're leading in, law firms that you're leading in, communities that you're helping to provide leadership for. And so I'm honored that I can call you guys friends, that I can pick up the phone and send a message and say, hey, y'all, let's let some brothers of faith who are handling business beyond the church and leadership with law and government, let's talk this out so that the world can hear that there are people that are thinking through this and having some honest dialogue without yelling and screaming and emotions, but are providing some context for solutions. So thank y'all so much for being on, and let's keep the conversation going.
All right, appreciate it. And next time, just call me and I'll have the video up.
All right, appreciate you guys. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. All right, bye-bye.